Amid the burning savannah of Masai Mara, a starving lioness named Nia limped through smoke and fire, carrying her dying cub Safi in her jaws. Exiled and desperate, she defied instinct and approached a human camp. There, Dr. Elias Crow, a war-scarred wildlife veterinarian, faced a miracle, a wild lioness seeking mercy, not prey. What followed would change everything he believed about courage, faith, and the power of compassion. The air tasted of ash and dying rain. Across the scorched plains of the Masai Mara, the evening light bent through a haze of smoke, turning the grasslands into molten bronze. The wind carried the brittle scent of burned acacia and something older, fear. Under the skeletal shadow of a fallen tree, a lioness named Nia stirred. Once her coat had been the color of sunlight on honey, smooth and regal. Now it hung dull and clumped, streaked with soot and blood. Her ribs showed like the bars of a broken cage, and her tail, once graceful, twitched with exhaustion. Her eyes, though, those deep amber eyes, still held something that refused to die, a mother's vow. At her belly lay a cub barely 3 months old, his body trembling with each shallow breath. Safi, the last of her litter, was small for his age, his fur patchy and matted with dust. His ears twitched at the hiss of wind, but he did not lift his head. He had not lifted it for hours. Nia nosed him gently, feeling the weak pulse of life beneath the fragile ribs. Her heart clenched, as if caught in its own snare. She remembered the other 2 cubs, gone before the rains came. She had buried them in silence, one under the roots of a fever tree, another beside a dry riverbed where hyenas sang their cruel hymns. Now, only Safi remained, and even he seemed to be slipping into that dim borderland between breath and memory. The fire had started 3 nights ago, when lightning kissed the dry plain and refused to let go. The flames had moved like thoughtless gods, consuming everything, driving prey and predator alike into chaos. Nia had run through the smoke, lungs bleeding from the heat, until she reached this dying patch of earth. The wind shifted again, and far to the west, orange tongues licked at the horizon. The fire was returning. Her stomach growled, a hollow, pitiful sound. She hadn't eaten in 4 days. The drought had taken the herds. The fire had taken what little remained. Her paws, once instruments of precision and power, trembled as she tried to stand. She could not remember the last time she had felt strength in her limbs. Yet weakness meant nothing beside love. Love was heavier. It pressed against her chest and whispered, "Get up." She thought of her old pride, the one that had cast her out. Nia had been a provider once, sleek and confident, her kills feeding sisters and cubs. But the drought had dried the rivers, thinned the patience of lions. The matriarch, an aging lioness named Makira, saw Nia's pregnancy as a threat to scarce resources. On a night thick with hunger, Makira had attacked, her roars echoing through the thorn trees. The memory still burned in Nia's bones, the flash of claws, the betrayal in her sister's eyes, the blood in her mouth as she fled. Since that night, Nia had lived without pride, without protection, only the endless calculus of survival. A faint whimper brought her back. Safi's paw twitched weakly. Nia lowered herself, wrapping her body around his shivering frame. Her tongue brushed his ear, rough and slow, the way mothers reassure the dying. Her breath came ragged, but inside her another voice began to speak, the one she had ignored until now. It was not instinct. It was memory. Months ago, before exile, she had watched from the tall grass as a human tended to a wounded zebra. The man had knelt beside the animal, murmuring softly, his hands moving with patience, not fear. He was tall, lean, and weathered by sun, his hair the color of rust, his beard short and neatly kept despite the dust. His name had drifted through the air from the mouths of other humans, Dr. Elias Crow. He had eyes like wet earth after rain, kind, observant, carrying the fatigue of someone who had seen too much pain and tried to mend it anyway. Nia had not understood his words, but she had understood his tone. He had stayed with the zebra through the night, feeding it water, tending the wound, until at dawn it stood again. The zebra had limped away. The man had smiled and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. In her hunger-clouded mind, the image of Elias flickered now like a mirage. She did not know why she remembered him, only that she did. He was camped not far beyond the western ridge, near the line of fever trees where the fire first began. If he was still there, if the smoke had not driven him away, perhaps. She looked down at Safi, whose breath rattled faintly. Perhaps the human could help. The thought was madness. Humans killed lions. Humans set snares and threw fire. Her scars still bore their stories, thin white lines from wire, the faint mark of a tranquilizer dart from years ago. But this man had been different. She remembered his eyes. There was no malice in them, only sorrow and a strange, quiet courage, the kind her own kind rarely showed anymore. Nia lifted her head. The wind had shifted east. The fire's breath was coming for them. Her ears flicked to the sound of crackling branches. She could stay and die, or move and hope. There was no choice. Slowly, she gripped Safi's scruff in her jaws. The cub made no sound. His body hung limp, but warmth still pulsed through his throat. Nia stepped out from the shade, her paws sinking into the ash. The ground was hot enough to sting. Her muscles screamed in protest, but she moved, one deliberate step, then another. The horizon shimmered, and beyond it, a faint tower of metal caught the dying light. The old windmill that marked the humans' camp. It stood like a beacon of impossible mercy. Every few steps, she paused to listen. The wind carried whispers, hyenas somewhere behind, their laughter brittle with hunger. Ahead, silence stretched like a dare. The smoke thickened, and the sky dimmed to bruise purple. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if she would fail. By nightfall, the fire was close enough that she could feel its heat on her flank. Sparks danced in her fur. Her pace slowed, but her resolve hardened. She imagined her lost cubs walking beside her, guiding her steps through the darkness. She imagined the human's hands, steady and calm, waiting beyond the ridge. For the first time in weeks, her fear broke beneath something greater. Faith. Not faith in safety or survival, but in the idea that mercy still existed somewhere in the world. That perhaps God, who had watched lions and men since the first dawn, might let one act of courage rewrite a lifetime of instinct. When the stars rose over the burning horizon, Nia kept walking, carrying her child through a world on fire, her heart a single silent prayer that the morning would still find them alive. Night in the Masai Mara was never silent. Even in ruin, the wilderness breathed, a choir of whispers. Wind through thorn trees, distant hyenas trading laughter for hunger. The brittle sigh of grass burnt down to memory. The smoke had thinned, but its taste still clung to the air like old sin. Under a veiled moon, Nia moved with the slow grace of something wounded but unbroken. Each step left a dark print of blood and ash. Her foreleg burned from the wire trap that had torn her earlier, a cruel ring of rusted steel hidden in the grass. meant for antelope, but catching anything desperate enough to pass. She had freed herself, but the price was flesh. The scent of her own blood followed her now, a trail that could summon death. She paused beside the carcass of a fallen impala, ribs opened like a book already read by scavengers. The night wind carried laughter, human laughter, rough and cruel. She sank low, pressing her belly to the earth, amber eyes narrowing. From beyond the hollow rose the sputtering cough of a motorbike engine, then voices, two men arguing in Swahili and English, their tones soaked in arrogance and smoke. The first voice belonged to a man called Boro, heavy-set, mid-40s, his belly round beneath a camouflage jacket that didn't belong to any army. His face was carved from greed, cheeks full, chin slick with unshaven stubble. A scar split his left eyebrow, a souvenir from the tusk of an elephant he'd once wounded but never killed. He had worked as a ranger once, until debt and drink turned him poacher. Boro laughed loudly, as if the night owed him attention. "That lioness took my trap," he said, kicking the dirt. "Worthless wire, but her hide will fetch enough when I find her again." The second man was Kefa, younger, leaner, and quieter. He couldn't have been more than 25, his eyes restless under a battered baseball cap. His shirt clung to his narrow shoulders, and his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from guilt. He had been a farmer before the drought stole his land. Now he followed Boro for money, though every shot and snare hollowed something inside him. When he spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "You think she'll come back this way?" he asked. Boro spat. "All mothers come back to their dead. Lions, humans, same curse." He laughed again, cruel and certain. Nia's ears flattened. She didn't understand the words, but she understood tone, mockery, intent, and danger. Her heart began to race. Safi whimpered faintly, and she lowered her head to shield him from sound. The cub's breathing was ragged. The night was colder now, the air dry as paper. She licked his muzzle, whispering in the language of mothers. "Stay, breathe, live." The men moved closer, dragging the carcass of a young wildebeest between them. The stink of blood rolled like fog. Nia's muscles coiled tight. She had faced hyenas before, leopards, even fire, but humans were different. They killed without hunger, without purpose, as if dominance was its own meal. She watched until their voices faded into the distance. Only when the engine's noise dissolved into the wind did she rise again. Her injured leg shook beneath her, but she moved. She had no choice. Ahead, the horizon shimmered with faint orange, the reflection of flames licking new fuel. Behind her, the plane whispered of pursuit. Each step became a prayer she didn't know she was saying. The metallic scent of her blood mingled with the acrid tang of ash. At the edge of a dried stream bed, she stopped. The soil here was cracked like old skin. In the hollow, the moonlight caught the glimmer of water, not a stream, only a shallow puddle trapped in rock. Still, it was life. Nia lowered Safi beside it and nudged him gently toward the reflection. He stirred, weakly lapping at the water. Relief surged through her like fire through kindling. She drank next, the cold biting her tongue, the taste mixed with mud and ash. For a moment, she allowed her head to rest beside her cubs. She could feel his heartbeat, faint but steady. The stars above seemed to pulse with the same fragile rhythm. But the reprieve was short. From the far ridge came a new sound, the cry of a hyena, sharp and urgent. Others answered, a clan was gathering. Nia lifted her head, eyes catching the moonlight. The hyenas would follow the scent of blood. She had minutes, maybe less. With effort, she took Safi in her jaws again and began to climb the embankment. The ground crumbled beneath her paws, sending small avalanches of dirt tumbling into the stream bed. Her muscles quivered from strain, the wound in her leg bleeding anew. Behind her, the laughter grew louder, a hideous chorus that danced between hunger and delight. When she reached the ridge, she saw movement ahead. Not predators this time, but a shape flickering in the distance. A windmill, tall and skeletal, turning slowly despite the wind. Beneath it, the faint outline of tents, the glint of metal under lantern light. Her heart stuttered. The human's den. She was closer than she thought, but between her and salvation stretched open ground, a field of tall, dry grass that could betray her every step. She hesitated, torn between instinct and hope. Behind her, the hyenas broke from the shadows, a dozen shapes spilling over the ridge like smoke given teeth. Their leader, a scarred matriarch with torn ears and clouded eyes, gave a guttural whoop. They had caught the scent. Nia ran. Every step was agony, but her speed was born of something older than fear. The cub dangled from her jaws, his tiny body swinging with each stride. The wind tore at her mane, the earth blurred beneath her. Hyenas followed, their feet drumming the dust. The camp's lights grew brighter. Inside that camp, Dr. Elias Crow was still awake. He had been studying fire maps on his laptop, his tent lit by a single solar lamp. He was tall and angular, his hair pulled back, spectacles sliding down his nose. His fingers bore the stains of antiseptic, his skin the faint bronze of years beneath African suns. He was a man who carried silence like armor. Once, long ago, he had been a field surgeon in Kenya's northern provinces. He had treated men torn apart by landmines, children with burns from oil fires. It had left him changed, quiet, methodical, and unwilling to abandon any life that still fought to live. When he heard the hyenas, his first thought was of a carcass nearby. But then came another sound, heavier, rhythmic, desperate. He stepped outside, eyes narrowing. Against the backdrop of flame and dust, he saw her, a lioness limping, carrying a cub, and behind her, a wave of predators. For a moment, disbelief held him frozen. Then instinct, the old soldier's reflex, returned. He grabbed the flare gun from his tent, fired it high. The explosion of red light split the night. Hyenas scattered, their laughter turning to shrieks. Nia stopped, blinking against the glare. Elias stood still, lowering the gun. Their eyes met. Man and lioness, both burned by life in different ways. He saw the wound on her leg, the blood, the cub limp in her jaws. He didn't move closer, only whispered to the air, "Come on, girl. You've come too far to stop now." Nia took one step toward him, then another. The distance between them closed. The space where fear once lived filled now with something stranger, purer. The fire cracked behind her. The windmill groaned above him, and between the two, life chose to keep walking. The first light of dawn was a thin, trembling thread that stitched the burned horizon to the world below. The wind had grown quieter, as if afraid to wake what the night had left broken. The ground still smoked in patches, gray tendrils curling upward like ghosts reluctant to leave. Near the edge of the clearing, the old windmill creaked slowly, each rotation a rasping sigh against the silence. Beneath it, a handful of tents crouched in the half-light. Canvas structures, pale and scarred by wind, marked with the emblem of the Masai Mara Wildlife Conservancy. Dr. Elias Crow stood outside the largest tent, his flare gun still warm in his hand. He was a tall man in his late 30s, thin but sinewy, his frame shaped by long years of field work rather than comfort. His short auburn hair was damp with sweat, and his skin carried the deep bronze of someone who had lived too long under the African sun. The lines around his eyes weren't from age alone. They were carved by sleepless nights and the weight of choices that never truly faded. A faint scar ran along his left cheek, the legacy of a broken bottle from a war-zone clinic in South Sudan, back when he still treated people instead of animals. That scar, like the memories it guarded, was a quiet boundary between the man who once tried to save everyone and the one who now tried to save what he could. From behind him emerged Amina Njoroge, the senior ranger of the outpost. She was in her early 30s, tall and athletic, her dark skin gleaming with the sheen of early sweat, her braided hair tied into a neat bun beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her eyes, sharp and almond-shaped, reflected a will forged in both discipline and compassion. Amina had grown up in Narok, near the edge of the park, daughter of a herdsman and a schoolteacher. Her father had been trampled by elephants when she was 12, but instead of hatred, she grew to see the wild as sacred and tragic, something to be protected, not feared. That belief made her fearless, though not reckless. "What did you see?" she asked, voice calm, melodic even in tension. Elias pointed toward the distant movement, a golden shape limping through the smoke. "A lioness, injured. She's carrying a cub." Amina's brow furrowed. "Alone?" "Yes." His voice was almost reverent. "And she's coming straight here." They both fell silent as the shape grew clearer. The lioness's gait was uneven but steady, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. The cub hung from her jaws, limp but not lifeless. When she reached the edge of the clearing, she stopped, the windmill's slow turning shadow falling over her like a benediction. The distance between predator and human was now only 30 paces. Amina's hand rested on her tranquilizer rifle. Elias raised a hand gently. "Don't," he murmured. "Not yet." The lioness's chest heaved with each breath. The wound on her foreleg was raw, blood crusted with dirt and soot. The scent of burnt fur reached them even from where they stood. Her eyes, gold darkened by fatigue, flickered from the humans to the tents, to the cub in her mouth. And then, slowly, she lowered him to the earth. Elias felt the air still, heavy with meaning. The cub's tiny chest moved shallowly. The lioness stepped back, head bowed slightly, her body trembling. It was not submission. It was surrender of another kind. "She's asking," Elias whispered. Amina exhaled softly, disbelief mixing with awe. "That's impossible. She shouldn't even be alive," Elias said, his throat tight. "But she is, and she's brought him here." Elias knelt slowly, making sure his movements were deliberate. He reached toward a small cooler box beside the tent, removed a slice of meat, fresh zebra from a recent carcass the rangers had salvaged for research purposes, and placed it on the ground midway between them. "You're safe here," he said, voice low and steady. The lioness glanced at the meat, then at her cub. Her body shuddered with the effort of restraint. Every instinct told her to eat, to survive, but instead she nosed the meat toward Safi, the cub, as if offering it to him. The gesture broke Amina's composure. "She's feeding him first," she whispered. Elias felt something ancient stir in his chest. He moved a few steps closer, still crouched low. "Easy now," he murmured. "I'm not your enemy." When he reached the cub, he saw the faint flicker of breath. "He's dehydrated," Elias muttered to himself, his doctor's voice returning. Hypothermic, malnourished. He looked up at Amina. I need fluids, a blanket, and the thermal pad, now. Amina hesitated. You're really going to touch him? He'll die if I don't. While she ran to fetch supplies, Elias examined the lioness. Her gaze followed his every move, but she didn't attack. Her eyes were glazed with exhaustion, yet somewhere in their depths lingered the sharp edge of awareness, trust, fighting instinct. Elias spoke softly as he worked, though he knew she couldn't understand. I've seen soldiers carry children across battlefields, he said, voice almost trembling. None looked as brave as you. Amina returned with the kit. You're insane, she said, but her tone was warm, laced with admiration. Let's make it count. Together, they worked in tense silence. Elias unrolled a small blanket and wrapped the cub. He injected a line of subcutaneous fluids under the loose skin. The cub twitched faintly, then went still again. Naya, the lioness, gave a low growl, deep but restrained. It's okay, Elias whispered, showing her the syringe. This helps. The wind shifted. The smell of smoke thickened again. Amina glanced toward the horizon. Fire's changing direction. We don't have long before it reaches the outer fence. Elias looked up at the lioness. If she came through that, she won't leave now. He gestured to the tent. We bring them inside. Amina blinked. Inside the tent? Elias, she's a lion. She's a mother, he said. Same thing. For a long heartbeat, Amina stared at him. Then she nodded once, clipped and decisive. All right, but if she moves wrong, I shoot to sedate. That's all I ask. Elias lifted the cub carefully, wrapped tight in the blanket. The lioness tensed, but did not move. She followed them step for step as they entered the tent, ducking beneath the flap, her massive body filling the space like a living storm. The instruments rattled on the shelves as she passed. Amina positioned herself by the entrance, rifle lowered but ready. Inside, the lamplight painted everything in soft gold. Elias set the cub on the padded table, attaching a small IV line and checking his vitals. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor filled the silence, a fragile heartbeat of technology against the pulse of the wild. Nia stood close enough that he could feel her breath on his neck, hot, steady, and uncertain. Hours passed without anyone speaking. The fire outside hissed and cracked, but did not breach the clearing. Safi's breathing grew stronger, his paws twitching in sleep. Elias sat back, exhaustion washing through him. He's fighting, he said softly. Amina lowered her rifle completely, finally allowing herself a smile. Then maybe God's still watching this place. Nia's head lowered, resting briefly near Elias's shoulder. He froze, not in fear, but in awe. The contact was light, fleeting, but deliberate. A gesture that spoke in a language older than words. Gratitude, faith, the faint beginning of trust. Outside, the windmill turned again, slow and sure. Inside, man and lioness kept vigil over the same fragile heartbeat as the dawn burned the last of the smoke away. By late afternoon, the air had changed again. It carried a pulse, a heavy, rhythmic heat that throbbed from the west, where the wildfire was crawling closer. The tent smelled of antiseptic, scorched dust, and something new, life. Safi, the cub, lay wrapped in a thermal blanket, his breathing steady but shallow. Each faint rise of his chest felt like a small miracle. Beside him, Nia dozed lightly, her head resting near the table's leg, her flank rising with the slow tide of exhaustion and relief. The bandage on her foreleg was clean but red at the edges. Every so often her ears flicked toward the wind, trained to a danger older than memory. Dr. Elias Crow sat on a crate near the tent's flap, notebook balanced on his knee. The light caught the faint stubble along his jawline and the tired grooves under his eyes. He was writing observations, temperature, pulse rate, hydration levels, but his hand moved slower than usual. Something about what he had witnessed defied clinical language. A wild lioness walking into a human camp to save her cub. No chart or data point could capture that. When the wind rattled the canvas, Elias looked up and watched Naya, her eyes half open, amber irises glowing faintly. She was watching him too. There was no hostility, only that unblinking animal awareness, a question suspended between species. He gave a small nod, the kind men use when words might break what silence is building. Outside, the sound of footsteps broke the stillness. Amina Njorogi appeared at the tent flap, a scarf wrapped around her nose to block the smoke. Her uniform was streaked with ash, and sweat darkened the collar. "The wind's shifting east again," she said, her voice low but urgent. "If it keeps this direction, the fire will hit the outer fence within an hour." Elias set down his notebook. "The vehicles?" "Still operational," Amina said. "But the road south is blocked by fallen acacias. North's the only exit." "North leads through the old bridge," he murmured. Amina exhaled sharply, resting a hand on her hip. "That bridge hasn't been safe in years. It's barely wood over rot. You try crossing that with a lioness in tow, you'll be in the river." Elias glanced at Nia and then back at the ranger. "I'm not leaving them." Amina gave him a long look, half frustration, half respect. "You never do you? You didn't in Turkana. You didn't in the floods." She shook her head. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we do it smart. I'll prep the truck, load oxygen and water. You handle the patients." She left without waiting for an answer. Elias turned back to Naya. "You hear that?" he said softly. "You've started a fire of your own." He smiled faintly at his own irony, then stood and began to gather equipment. Fluids, portable heaters, the small solar generator. The tent flap moved. For a moment, Elias thought it was the wind again, but it wasn't. A shape stood silhouetted against the orange light outside, a tall man in a dirty jacket and a faded cap, holding something metallic. Elias's body tensed. The man stepped closer, and Elias recognized the expression: calculation. Boro, the poacher from the night before, his broad chest heaving slightly. Behind him was Kefa, thinner, hesitant, his face drawn tight with guilt. "Evening, Doctor," Boro said, his voice slick and false friendly. His eyes darted past Elias toward the lioness inside. "Heard you had visitors. Thought I'd check in before the fire does." Elias's mind raced. His flare gun was empty. The tranquilizer rifle stood against the far wall. He kept his tone calm. "This is private property under the Conservancy. You should leave now." Boro chuckled. "Private property's burning, Doc. And that lion's worth more than your whole truck." Before Elias could reply, Nia rose. Her movement was fluid but filled with quiet thunder. The tent suddenly felt smaller, her presence expanding into every corner. Boro's smirk faltered. Kefa took a step back. "She's injured," Elias said carefully, his voice steady. "And she has a cub. You'll turn around and go." Boro raised the barrel of his old hunting rifle. "Move, Doctor!" A sharp click echoed. Amina, returning at the worst and best possible moment. She stood behind them, rifle raised, eyes hard. "He's not moving," she said coldly. "But you are." The tension cracked like dry branches. Kefa's voice broke through. shaky but desperate. "We can't stay here. The fire—" He didn't finish. Outside, the wind roared, carrying a wall of red light. The smoke thickened so fast it stole the air. The fire had jumped the trench. Flames licked the edge of camp. Elias grabbed the blanket-wrapped cub, shouting over the chaos. "We go now!" Amina fired a warning shot. Boro flinched, then ran, dragging Kefa after him. The crackling inferno chased them into the haze. Elias turned to Nia. "Come!" he shouted, motioning toward the vehicle. The lioness hesitated only once, glancing back at the tent that had sheltered her child. Then she moved, keeping pace beside Elias as if she understood. Amina drove the truck to the clearing's edge, engine coughing in protest. Elias climbed into the back, securing Safi in a crate lined with blankets. The air was thick with heat and sparks. Behind them, the camp burned. They drove toward the north road, the truck jolting over roots and ash. The sky above was blood orange, and the world seemed to pulse with sound. Elias shouted directions. Amina's eyes stayed fixed on the path ahead. "Bridge is close!" she yelled. The bridge appeared through the smoke, a skeletal thing of wood and rusted bolts, spanning the dry riverbed below. Half of its planks were gone, the supports blackened from old fire damage. Amina slammed the brakes. "It won't hold." "It has to," Elias said, voice hoarse. They had seconds before the fire swallowed them. He leapt from the truck, checking the structure. The outer beams groaned but didn't give. He turned to Nia, who waited, eyes bright in the glare. Safi whimpered from the crate. Elias lifted it, motioning for Amina to drive slowly forward. One at a time, the tires hit the bridge. It creaked, dust falling like rain. Amina's knuckles were white on the wheel. Elias walked beside the truck, guiding, every nerve alive. Halfway across, the front wheel slipped. The bridge sagged, one support snapping with a dry crack. Elias dropped the crate, throwing his shoulder against the truck frame to keep it balanced. Nia reacted faster than thought. She lunged forward, planting her weight against the opposite side, claws scraping wood. Her roar cut through the roar of fire, a sound that made even the flames hesitate. Amina slammed the gas. The truck lurched forward, wheels catching, pulling free just as the bridge's center gave way behind them. They reached solid ground. The bridge collapsed, a spray of embers rising into the choking sky. Elias fell to his knees, coughing, chest burning. He looked up to see Nia still standing, panting, her fur singed but eyes fierce. She glanced once at him, then at the cub, before lowering her head, as if acknowledging the strange, fragile alliance between them. Behind them, the fire devoured the old camp. Ahead, the land opened, a valley untouched by flame, green faintly visible through the smoke. The wind shifted, carrying the first hint of rain. For the first time in days, Elias felt something like hope. He reached out, resting a soot-blackened hand on Nia's shoulder. "We're not done yet," he said quietly. "But we made it." The lioness blinked slowly, then turned toward the valley, her cub stirring softly in the crate. Together they walked into the smoke's fading light, leaving behind the fire that had tried to unmake them. Morning came quietly, like a breath after grief. The storm that followed the fire had passed, leaving behind the clean scent of wet earth and renewal. The valley spread before them in soft light, green returning where ash had fallen, mist curling over the hills as if the land itself exhaled in relief. The burned forest behind them was a memory of red and ruin, now tamed by the steady rhythm of rainfall. Dr. Elias Crow stood beside the small medical tent they had erected on higher ground, watching steam rise from the damp soil. His face was still darkened by soot, his clothes stiff with smoke. Yet his eyes carried something lighter now, a quiet astonishment that they were all still here. Beside him, Amina Njoroge was crouched over a metal basin, washing her hands. Her knuckles were scraped, her uniform torn, but her expression held a kind of weary triumph. Strands of damp hair had escaped her braid, clinging to her face, and she brushed them aside with a small laugh. "I can't believe we made it through that bridge," she said, glancing up at Elias. "When it cracked, I thought that was it." Elias managed a faint smile, his voice hoarse. "I thought so too." Then she pushed back. His gaze drifted toward the lioness resting a few meters away beneath a cluster of fig trees. Nia, her fur still singed at the edges, lay curled around Safi, who was now awake and blinking at the world with wide, curious eyes. The cub's coat had begun to regain its luster, soft gold catching in the new light. He batted lazily at a leaf, too weak yet too alive to stop. Nia's breathing was deep and even, her flank rising steadily. A faint scar crossed her leg where the snare had cut, cleaned and treated by Elias the night before. She had resisted sedation, meeting every needle with low growls until fatigue had finally claimed her. Now, in sleep, she looked at peace, the fierce lines of her face softened by rest. Elias turned back to his kit. "Her vitals are stabilizing," he said, almost to himself. "The fluids worked. The infection hasn't spread." Amina stood, stretching her back. "And the cub?" "He's recovering faster than I expected. Cubs that weak usually don't come back." Elias's voice trailed off, and Amina caught the weight in his tone, the ghost of a failure he still carried. Years ago, in another field tent, there had been a child instead of a cub, and the outcome had been different. The memory lived in the set of his jaw, the scar on his cheek, the quiet precision with which he handled every living thing since. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and acacia blossoms. Somewhere far across the valley, a herd of impala called softly, tentative life returning to silence. Amina checked the sky, gray clouds breaking apart like torn cloth. "The Conservancy helicopter should reach us by afternoon," she said. "They'll want to relocate the lions before tourists find out." Elias shook his head slowly. "No, cages, no relocation." Amina frowned. "You can't keep them here forever, Elias. They'll need to hunt again. She's still wild." "That's exactly why," he said. "We're not keeping her. We're preparing her to return." Amina studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then we do it right." She moved to the truck and began unloading supplies. A small scale, nutrient paste, a set of portable tracking collars. Her movements were efficient but gentle, shaped by the kind of respect that had no words. By midday, sunlight poured through gaps in the cloud cover, painting the valley gold. Elias crouched near Naya, checking the bandage once more. She opened one eye, fixing him with a steady, unblinking gaze. "Easy," he murmured. "You're safe." He wasn't sure why he said it aloud, perhaps to reassure himself as much as her. Safi climbed clumsily onto his mother's foreleg, mewing softly. Nia nudged him closer to Elias, as if to show him what he had helped preserve. Amina approached with 2 collars, lightweight, padded, designed for tracking without harm. "These will help us monitor them once they're back out there," she explained. "Just data signals, nothing else." Elias nodded, fitting one around Nia's neck as gently as possible. The lioness tensed but didn't resist. Her golden eyes watched every movement. When he was done, he stepped back. "Tomorrow," he said, "we take them to the eastern ridge. There's a water source there, enough prey, and far from the burned zone." That night, as the sun bled into purple and gold, they built a small fire, not for warmth, but for farewell. Elias sat on a crate, sketching notes by lantern light. Amina brewed tea in an old tin cup, the smell of cardamom and smoke filling the air. "You know," she said, handing him a cup, "most people wouldn't risk their lives for an animal that could kill them." Elias accepted the tea with a faint smile. "Most people haven't seen what I've seen. War taught me something. Life doesn't divide into human and animal, only into those who suffer and those who help." Amina nodded slowly, eyes on the fire. "Then I hope someone helped you once." He didn't answer. The silence was enough. When dawn came again, it carried the weight of goodbye. They loaded what little gear remained into the truck and drove east toward the ridge. The rain had returned lightly, soft drops pattering against metal. Naya walked alongside, her gait stronger now, the cub trotting at her side. At the ridge's crest, Elias stopped. The valley below stretched wide and green, a rebirth carved from fire. He turned to Nia, voice steady but heavy. "This is where you belong." He opened the crate, stepping back. Naya hesitated only a moment before stepping out, Safi following close. She looked back once, eyes meeting Elias's, and in that gaze was something vast, understanding, gratitude, and something more eternal than both. She pressed, her head briefly against his arm before turning toward the open land. Safi bounded ahead, tripping over his own paws, the sound of his small growl blending with the sigh of the wind. Amina stood beside Elias as they watched the pair disappear into the tall grass. "You'll miss them," she said softly. "I already do," he replied. Hours later, when the chopper came, the valley was empty except for footprints fading into green. As they lifted into the air, Elias looked down and thought he saw movement. Two golden shapes crossing the river, mother and cub, wild again. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. Not of fire this time, but of rain returning home. In a world scorched by fire and fear, one lioness dared to trust what nature had always told her to flee: humanity. Yet through that impossible act of faith, life was reborn. Perhaps that's the miracle God hides in plain sight, that love still reaches across every wall, between man and beast, between despair and hope, between a heart broken and one reborn. Every sunrise, every small act of kindness, every time we choose compassion over indifference, that is the same miracle repeating itself. The same mercy that saved Nia and Safi still moves quietly through our own days, waiting for us to notice. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to believe that miracles are real. Comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe, write Amen for all the mothers still fighting their storms, both human and wild. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and redemption. And may God bless you and every soul who chooses compassion over fear.